In creating a game or a puzzle or even an educational quiz, we may have a collection that we want to randomly reorder. And in doing so, we want to make sure that each item is only used once. So for example, let's say I have a word and I want to scramble that word. I have a variable called myWord, which contains the word plant. I'm going to reorder those letters randomly. I create another string variable called scrambled, and then I have a Boolean array that I just simply named used, and it equals, in this case, false for 5 elements, 0 through 4. My word is 5 characters long. I'm going to create a random object and then another integer variable called idx, and use a for loop where I'm going to go through however many characters there are in the word. In this case, there's 5, so I'm going to go from 0 to 4. Then a do loop. I'm going to randomly generate a number between 0 and 4. That's the rnd.next. And as long as my used array element idx is false, we'll move on. But if it's true, so while it's true, I'm going to generate a new number. Once I find a Boolean element that is false, I'm going to concatenate scrambled with myword.substring, whatever that idx is, in one character. And then my used element idx will be set to true, so I don't reuse that character. And that'll take me through my 5 characters being reorganized through that for next loop, and I can then display that in a message box. So you'll see here the example ATNLP is plant randomly scrambled. Let's walk through this a little bit closer. In my for loop, I'm going to go through 5 times, 0 to 4, and then the do loop, we're generating a round number, and let's say we generate a 2. Loop while used element idx. So idx element 2 is false. So that's not true. It's going to go on into the next line, which is scrambled. It's going to equal myword substring. In this case, idx2, that's our A, and we take one character. Scrambled now equals A. I'm going to set used idx element 2 to true. Next counter. So now counter is 1. I'm going to get a second letter here. Again, my do loop. And this time I'm going to generate another number, and this time it's 4. So again, I'm going to look at used element 4. It's false, and so I'm going to move on outside of my loop. We're going to concatenate to scramble myword.substring element 4 and taking one character, and now scrambled equals AT. I'm going to set my used element 4 to true. Next counter, we're going to generate a number, random number between 0 and 4. And let's say it randomly generates a 2 again. Well, now used idx is true, so my loop while being true will go back through the loop again and generate another number for idx. And let's say it gets a 3. Used element 3 is false, so we're going to concatenate to scrambled substring element 3. That's our n in one character, and scrambled now equals atn. Used idx element 3 becomes true. Next counter. Now we're looking for our 4th character. This is counter value 3. Generate another random number between 0 and 4, and we get a 1. Used idx element 1 is false, so we're going to concatenate to scrambled the value of element 1 in plant, that's our L, and now we get ATNL. And used element 1 becomes true. Next counter, counter equaling 4. The do loop, this time randomly generates a number, and let's say it generates a 1 again. Well, element 1 of used is true, so we're going to generate another number. It generates a 4. Well, that's also true. It's going to generate another number. Maybe it goes back to 2. That's also true. It'll keep generating until it finds an element of used that is not true. So it generates a 0. Used element 0 is false. Scrambled's going to take on element 0 of plant, one character, and now scrambled equals ATNLP. And used element 0 becomes true. Next counter is outside the range, so I'm done with that for next loop, and I can then display my scrambled word in the message box. I've used that principle here in this project of word scramble, where the user can enter any word and choose to scramble it. It will scramble those letters randomly. I also set this up, though, to if they just put a 2-letter word in, well, there's a 50% chance we get the same word. So I've made it so that the scrambled word cannot equal the entered word. And as you can see, they can use any length of word. And I'm creating the used array length to match the length of the word. Let's take a look at the code really quickly. Nothing that different here. Pretty much the same code I showed you earlier, except I'm setting the number of elements of used to the word length minus 1. Remember, we start counting with 0. Word length starts counting with 1, so do a subtract 1. That's going to be my used Boolean array. And then I did all this in a do loop, and I'm going to repeat this if scrambled equals my word. There's always the possibility, even with a 5-letter word, that maybe you'll get the same order of characters. That doesn't fit my needs here. I want to make sure it's scrambled. I have a for next loop here that generates all the false values for my used Boolean array, however many there are. There may not always be 5, there might be 10, there might be 2, there might be 7. We're going to generate those false values for whatever the length of used word is. And I do that here because if I'm generating this a second time, let's say this came out that scrambled was the same as my word, I'm going back through, I need to make sure I reset those false values. Otherwise, I'll get an endless loop because I'll never find one that's false. Here's the for next, really no different than we had before. And then finally, rather than using a message box, I put it into a text box that was set to read only. Anytime they change the word, I'm going to set the scrambled text box to null. Here's another example of using a Boolean array to randomly order the answers of 5 buttons in a quiz. So my quiz is which one of the following was not a member of the British rock band Queen. And we have choices here of Freddie Mercury, Brian May, Roger Taylor, Eric Clapton, and John Deacon. The order of these buttons is randomized. In fact, I got a little button here where I can test that and just simply randomize the order each time. So I can reorder those. And then the user can click on a button and get feedback. Oh, that's not right. Eric Clapton is the correct answer. And it doesn't matter which button is Eric Clapton's, it's going to say that's correct. And again, if I come back and choose Roger Taylor, that's not correct. Let's take a look at how this was coded. My 5 buttons are simply named BTN-A, BTN-B through BTN-E. Here's the code. I'm going to dim answers as string, and there are my 5 answers. Eric Clapton, Freddie Mercury, Brian May, John Deacon, and Roger Taylor. Now I made the first one the correct answer, which was the person who's not a member of Queen. Then I set a Boolean array of 5 false values in my random number object. When I load the form, I'm going to call a method called randomizeAnswerOrder. And what I'm doing there is creating a button reference called myButton. I'm going to dim IDX as my integer. That's going to be my random number that I'm generating for the integer to access those 5 different used elements of my Boolean array. I reset the used elements because I might call this again in that test reorder button. If I set it up here and I want to go through the randomized order a second time, those are still going to be true. So if I'm going to order this, if I'm going to reorder it again, I want to make sure I set these all back to false. And then here's my for loop. For I equals 0 to answers.count minus 1. Answers.count is 5. So I'm going to go from 0 to 4. My button equals me.controls.item, and I can reference the item by its name. So remember we named those BTN-A, BTN-B, BTN-C, and so forth. So I'm using an interpolated string of BTN, and then the character value of I plus 65. I starts as 0. The ASCII value, or the character value of 65, 0 plus 65, is a capital A. When it's a 4, it becomes a 69, it's a capital E. Then I do my do loop. You can generate a random number between 0 and 4. And while used IDX is true, I'm going to regenerate that. So make sure we don't use each answer more than once. MyButton.text equals answers element IDX. So the first time button A will equal one of those 5. Then button B will equal one of the remaining 4. And button C will equal one of the remaining 3, and so forth. Each time through my for loop, I'm setting used.idx equal to true, so I don't reuse the answers. And then all 5 of my buttons, check to see what the value was of the button, and I'm going to take the lowercase of that, and if it equals correct.toLower, then I'll say that's correct. Otherwise, we'll say no, try again. And then again, that little button where I'm going to reorder each time just to test, all I'm doing there is calling randomize order again. If you just jumped into this video, you can see all the videos from the Programming Practicum playlist by clicking on the image in the lower right. And if you'd like to be alerted to future videos I create, you can click my picture in the top right to subscribe to the channel.